Imagine that the sweet old lady from your neighborhood turned out to be a ruthless killer. Can you believe it? Some didn't even have to imagine. In this video we will tell you about the most elderly villains, and at the end of the video you'll hear the story of a woman who for many years took lives with her own hands. Enjoy watching. For 14 years the residents of the city of Khabarovsk in Russia lived in fear. A serial killer was on the loose here, targeting both children and adults. No one could have guessed that the seemingly harmless elderly woman was behind these murders. Sofya Zhukova was born in 1939. She barely received an education, but never shied away from hard work throughout her life. Even in old age, she remained extraordinarily strong. In her youth, Sofya got married, but her husband passed away in 2005. After his death, Zhukova became embittered, irritable, and especially annoyed by children's games and shouts. On a couple of occasions, neighbors heard Baba Sonia, as they called her, yelling at the kids, threatening to cut off their heads and hands if they didn't stop making noise. On a December day 2005, 8-year-old Nastya didn't return from school. Her last sighting was by a classmate. The two girls walked home together, said goodbye, and Nastya went into her apartment building, but never made it to her apartment. Hope of finding the little girl alive faded after a couple of weeks. That's when a resident found a bag of meat on a dump site. He took it home for his dogs and only later realized that he had brought back human remains. Sofya was not arrested at that time, as her involvement in the incident could not be proven. 8 years later, Zhukova attracted the attention of investigators once again. This time she was questioned about the disappearance of a 77-year-old woman named Mikhaeva, who had asked Sofya for a place to stay for a couple of weeks. However, shortly after arriving at Sofya's place, Mikhaeva vanished. The police found traces of blood in Zhukova's apartment, but once again the pensioner managed to evade suspicion. She came up with a convincing story. During an argument, Mikhaeva's nose started bleeding due to high blood pressure, leaving stains on the floor. Then her friend left and Sofya claimed not to know what happened next. The third and final murder committed by the elderly woman occurred in early 2019. This time, the victim was not a defenseless child or a frail pensioner, but a 62-year-old man named Vasily who worked as a janitor. He asked to rent a room in Zhukova's apartment, and shortly after moving in, he disappeared. Since everyone in the neighborhood knew that the janitor had been living with the pensioner, she became the prime suspect. Neighbors from below reported hearing dull but powerful thuds several nights in a row, as if something was being chopped. They also noticed Zhukova carrying heavy bags to trash containers in the morning. When children found the remains of the janitor near a heating duct, suspicions grew stronger. During a search of Zhukova's apartment, they discovered an axe with traces of the janitor's blood. Initially, the elderly woman vehemently denied her involvement in the events. However, she eventually confessed to the crimes. Psychiatrists confirmed that the pensioner was of sound mind and fully aware of her actions. In 2020, Sofya Zhukova contracted COVID-19 and died before facing trial. She was posthumously convicted of 3 brutal murders. One charming elderly woman had a passion for both cooking and arsenic. Occasionally, these two interests converged and someone would meet their demise. In 1905, a girl named Nannie Doss was born into a large family of farmers. At the age of 16, she was married off to a man named Charlie Braggs, whom she didn't love. Nevertheless, she lived with him for 7 long years, during which they had 4 children. In 1927, 2 of their children died for no apparent reason. They had no known illnesses, but strangely, nobody grew suspicious except for Charlie, who realized that something was amiss. He divorced Nannie, took their eldest daughter Melvina, and moved to another city. Nannie's next marriage lasted for 16 years. Frank Harrelson, her new husband, was a burden to her. He drank excessively and hardly worked. Occasionally, Nannie's elder daughter Melvina would visit her. Melvina was now married and had 2 adorable children of her own. One day, she asked her mother to look after her kids as she had to leave. Nannie agreed and poisoned them. Yet, once again, no one questioned the sudden deaths of healthy children. In 1945, it was Frank's turn to meet his fate. Nannie spiked his alcohol with poison and he drank it, passing away. His death, like the others, raised no eyebrows. On the contrary, people sympathized with Nannie, as she had lost grandchildren and a husband in a short span of time. It is believed that over the next 10 years, Doss killed 3 more husbands, her own mother, one of her sisters, 2 of her mothers-in-law, a grandchild and a nephew. Nannie was only caught in 1954. She readily admitted to her crimes, showed no signs of remorse, flirted and joked with journalists. When questioned about the reasons for her murders, she claimed it was all due to marital boredom. Nannie Doss was sentenced to life in prison and died there in 1964 at the age of 59. "Citizens of the court, please release me. I won't do it again," a desperate pensioner shouted at the judges as they walked out of the courtroom to decide his fate. Viktor Fokin was convinced he hadn't done anything wrong, because he only killed bad and worthy women. The man's life was entirely ordinary. He was born in a small town, completed school, got a job at a factory, got married and raised a daughter. Perhaps the only thing that distinguished Viktor from other men was that he outlived his wife. Usually husbands pass away before their wives. Viktor had one more peculiarity. He had an insatiable appetite for sex. He couldn't live without it. However, the 53-year-old widower was shunned by women. Nobody rushed to pick up and warm up the unkempt, partially deaf elderly man who loved to drink. Fokin was only in demand among alcoholics, prostitutes and the homeless. Nonetheless, Viktor was content with this. He didn't care about the appearance of his lovers, and perhaps he wouldn't have become a maniac if it weren't for his health failing him. In the early 90s, Fokin, who considered himself a sexual giant, became impotent. At first, the man was deeply troubled and tried to seek treatment, but then he accidentally discovered that he could derive pleasure in other ways. He encountered his first victim, a 35-year-old prostitute, at the train station square and invited her to his home to have a drink and a snack. Then, of course, he invited her to his bed, and once again realized that from now on, he could only invent stories about his sexual escapades. This drove Viktor into a rage, and he took it out on the woman, beating her to death from behind. After mutilating the corpse, Fokin experienced indescribable pleasure and continued to kill. He followed the same pattern. He sought out easily accessible girls at the train station, brought them home and attacked them, strangling some and drowning others in the bathtub or stabbing them. Viktor disposed of the victims' remains in the sewage system and threw the remaining body parts in the garbage bin. Fokin was only arrested in 2000, by which time he had killed 9 women. No one had reported the disappearances, because Viktor deliberately asked new acquaintances if they had any relatives or friends, and chose those who were alone. Psychiatrists diagnosed Fokin with necrosadism, a deviation in which a person derives sexual pleasure from disfiguring bodies. Viktor passed away in a correctional labor colony 2 years after receiving his sentence. Between 1939 and 1940, Italian woman Leonarda Cianciulli murdered 3 women, turning them into soap and cakes. The killer believed that this method would break a family curse in which she strongly believed. Leonarda was born in 1894 in Montella, Italy. Her entire life she was highly superstitious, and that's probably all we know about her childhood and youth. At the age of 23, Leonarda married a clerk. Her family was against this marriage. Rumor had it that they were so opposed that the girl's mother cursed the young couple in anger. The situation was worsened by the fact that Leonarda had visited a fortune teller who predicted marriage and children for her, but according to the seer, they would die young. In a terrible twist of fate, the girl and her husband did indeed seem to be plagued by misfortunes everywhere they went. Cianciulli suffered multiple miscarriages and lost many of her children in infancy due to various illnesses. To protect the surviving children, she turned to occult sciences. Leonarda believed that by resorting to black magic, she could shield her family. In 1939, she learned that her eldest son, Giuseppe, was required to join the Italian army as preparations for World War II were underway. She convinced herself that to prevent his death, she needed to make several sacrifices to appease evil forces. She chose her neighbors. By the way, among her neighbors, Leonarda was known as a respectable lady and a loving mother who never aroused any suspicion. She dispatched the 3 women in the same manner. She killed them with a hatchet, dissected their bodies into pieces, and used them to make soap and cookies from their blood. When the police arrested Leonarda, she vehemently denied any involvement in the murders until investigators began to hint that her son might be implicated. Cianciulli confessed to all the crimes to protect her child from any interrogations. In 1946, she stood trial. The woman showed no remorse for her actions, believing that she was saving her children. Leonarda Cianciulli was sentenced to 30 years in prison and an additional 3 years in a mental institution for criminal psychopaths. She died of a heart attack at the age of 76. The East Area Rapist, the Golden State Killer, the Visalia Ransacker, the Night Stalker. These are all nicknames given to the same individual by the press in different countries. He is responsible for over 50 rapes and at least 13 murders. Since 1976, Joseph DeAngelo instilled fear in the Sacramento region. He was audacious, elusive, and undeniably incredibly cunning. The California killer was always meticulous in selecting the location and method of his crimes. He operated in multiple cities and left behind almost no evidence. The police never found his fingerprints. Investigators had a vague description of his appearance, and the DNA samples left at crime scenes were of no use in apprehending him during those times. It took 4 decades to unravel one of the most famous criminal mysteries in recent US history. Joseph DeAngelo was finally caught in an astonishingly unexpected way, according to the official version. One of his relatives decided to trace the family's genealogy and uploaded their DNA data to the GED Match website, which allowed forensic scientists Paul Holes to identify the killer. As of today, after unsuccessful attempts to feign dementia in court, the 74-year-old maniac is in prison awaiting sentencing. Most likely he will face the death penalty. The phrase "the oldest serial killer in history" conjures up images of a scruffy old cannibal grandpa, but in reality, it's a 90-year-old dandelion of a grandmother who helped her fellow villagers with their family problems. Anna de Pishtonia is known as the Witch of Banat, but in her Serbian village they simply called her Baba Anuka. She didn't become the local angel of death overnight. She was quite a lovely and pleasant young lady until she turned 20. She received a good education and moved to the border with the Ottoman Empire. There was no shortage of soldiers there, and young Anna fell in love with one of them. An Austro-Hungarian officer charmed her, infected her with syphilis, and then heroically went off to fight the Ottomans. It took the girl a while to realize she'd been deceived. After all, there was no war with the Turks at the time, and when she did, she developed a deep hatred for all men. Sometime later, around the age of 40, the woman decided to pursue her true passion, herbalism and medicine. She was a talented self-taught healer with a knack for business. Her new profession helped her amass wealth. Baba Anuka made a fortune selling her illness elixir. Soldiers and officers who wanted to be discharged from the army or avoid medical examinations would take her tea, which made them appear unhealthy and feeble. Afterward, they could easily fail the medical examination. However, as time passed, the military clientele dwindled, and rumors that some of her clients had permanently damaged their health or even died were bad for business. So Anna changed her target audience. With the help of her assistant, she spread rumors among the local women about magic water. Soon, lines of unhappy women came to her. They would arrive under the cover of night and tell her about their marital problems, after which they would seek her help. Baba Anuka would provide them with a potion. Despite its name, Love Potion, it contained a potent poison. The women had similar stories: alcoholic husbands, unfaithful husbands, abusive husbands, and husbands who enjoyed beating their wives. After listening to their problems, Baba Anuka would ask one question: "How much does your husband weigh?" The woman would state her husband's weight, and Baba would provide them with the appropriate amount and concentration of potion. This way, up to 150 bad husbands died in the region. However, the wives of course claimed they knew nothing about the poison. They believed the witch killed through witchcraft, sucking soul out with a straw via her familia. The investigators didn't buy this version and sentenced at least 2 women to life imprisonment. As for the old lady herself, she was only sentenced to 8 years for producing poisons. She successfully served her time in prison, returned home, and lived to be 100 years old. According to local legend, she died on her exact birthday, as per pact with the devil. That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, everyone.